I remember the moment I found out, and if you're reading this, you might understand when I say it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. It wasn't a sudden drop, though, not like falling from a cliff. No, it was more like the gradual vanishing of a floor you thought was stable, crumbling inch by inch until you're just left dangling, gripping air, and wondering how you missed the warning signs. The signs had been there, I realize now. I'd chosen to ignore them because I loved her. Love, it seemed, was the great excuse for turning a blind eye. I had always believed our love was strong enough to weather any storm until I found out that she'd been seeing her ex behind my back. Her name was Leah, and to me, she'd been everything. We met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those events where the music was too loud and everyone's laughter felt like it echoed in an empty room. But with her, there was this instant connection. She laughed at my bad jokes, even the ones that made no sense at all, and I found myself wanting to make her laugh every day for the rest of our lives. I never thought the end would come in the form of betrayal. The night it all came crashing down, I had just come home from work, tired but excited to be with her. It was our anniversary, our 3rd wedding anniversary. I had spent weeks planning a special dinner, even cooked the entire meal myself, which I thought would be a nice surprise. And in a way, it was. Just not the surprise I was expecting. When Leah came home, she was distracted, her phone glued to her hand. She barely acknowledged the effort I'd put into the evening. She didn't see the candles or the flowers, or maybe she didn't care. I could tell she was hiding something by the way she bit her lower lip, her eyes darting around nervously like she was expecting someone to leap out from behind the furniture. It wasn't until I glanced at her phone, at the lit screen she was desperately trying to keep out of my line of sight, that I saw it. A name that shouldn't have been there. Derek, the ex-boyfriend, the one she'd sworn to me she'd left in her past, the one she said meant nothing after she'd met me. The way she fumbled to lock her phone, the way her face turned white as I quietly said his name, those moments told me everything I needed to know. Leah had always been an awful liar, and that night was no exception. The panic in her eyes confirmed what my gut had already told me. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice cracking as she tried to plaster on a reassuring smile. But it was what it looked like. Hell, it was probably worse than what it looked like, and I wasn't naive enough to pretend otherwise. She tried to explain, stammering her way through some half-baked story about how Derek had reached out for support because he was going through a rough patch. They'd just met up a few times. Nothing happened, she claimed. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the texts were still on her phone, those incriminating words I couldn't unsee, not even if I wanted to. I'm not proud of what I did next. I stormed out of our home, out into the cold, directionless night, and drove without thinking. Anger was like a storm raging inside me, all those unanswered questions and the sickening realization that the woman I'd pledged my life to was betraying me. I ended up at my best friend's place. Alex opened the door and took one look at my face before pulling me inside. I spent that night on his couch, venting my anger and heartbreak while he listened, quiet and patient. It was Alex who gave me the idea, although at the time, it was more like a joke. "You know," he said, sipping on his beer, "you could just call her out in front of everyone. Make her see what she's done, in front of her family. They think she's this saintly angel, right? Let's see how she looks when the truth is out in the open." We both laughed, but it was a hollow kind of laugh, at least for me, the kind that aches in your chest because it's covering up the pain beneath. I thought about what Alex said after he'd gone to bed. The thought festered, grew into something that felt like justice, like payback for the humiliation I'd endured. Leah had her family over that weekend, an event I'd agreed to before I knew the truth. Her parents, her younger sister, and her grandparents would all be there. Normally, I'd love having them over. I'd always felt welcomed by them, and her family was warm and loving. But this time, I had a different plan. A plan that tasted bitter, but necessary. The morning of the family gathering, I acted as if everything was normal. Leah seemed nervous, but she had no reason to suspect anything, not really. I smiled when her parents arrived, made small talk with her grandparents, and even helped Leah set the table. It was a strange feeling, like I was outside my own body, watching a scene unfold that I already knew the ending to. The moment came when everyone was seated around the table, laughter and conversation flowing freely. Leah seemed more relaxed, like she thought the worst had passed. That was when I stood up, my wine glass in hand, and tapped it lightly with a fork. The sound rang out in the room, silencing the chatter as everyone turned to look at me. "I want to make a toast," I said, my voice steady, though inside, my heart was pounding. Leah's eyes widened, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "To my wife, Leah, I want to thank you for teaching me a very important lesson this week." I glanced around the table, at her parents, who were smiling at me warmly, at her sister, who looked confused but amused. Leah's face was paling by the second, her smile starting to falter. "You see," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Leah's, "Leah taught me that trust is a fragile thing. It can be shattered so easily, especially when someone decides to sneak around behind your back with their ex." A stunned silence fell over the room. Her mother gasped, her father's smile dropped, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Leah's face went white, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words, but none came. "I loved you, Leah," I said, my voice trembling now, the anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "But I won't be made a fool of. Not anymore." I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope, throwing it onto the table in front of her. The divorce papers. "I want a divorce, Leah. Consider this the end." The room exploded into chaos. Her mother started crying, her sister was shouting at Leah, asking if it was true, while her father just sat there, stunned. Leah's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the nights she'd spent with him while I was at home waiting for her. I walked out, leaving behind the life I thought I'd have. I could hear her calling after me, her voice cracking with desperation, but I didn't turn around. Not this time. I stayed at Alex's that night, the adrenaline slowly fading into a numb emptiness. It wasn't the satisfaction I thought it would be, humiliating her like that. It didn't fill the hole she'd left in me. But it was done, and there was no going back. The next few weeks were a blur. Leah tried to contact me, leaving tearful voicemails, sending long messages trying to explain herself. I didn't respond. I blocked her number eventually, needing the space to clear my head, to figure out what my life looked like without her in it. Alex was a godsend. He kept me company on the nights when the loneliness got too heavy, distracting me with movies and bad takeout. He never once judged me for what I'd done, though I knew it wasn't exactly the high road I'd taken. He just listened when I needed to talk and made me laugh when I needed to forget. Slowly, I started to heal. I found a new apartment, smaller but cozy, a place that was mine and mine alone. I took up running, something to clear my mind and burn off the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. I'd see couples in the park sometimes, holding hands, laughing together, and it would ache, this sharp reminder of what I'd lost. But I knew I'd made the right choice. Leah had broken something between us, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies or tears. Months later, I heard from a mutual friend that Leah had moved away, back to her hometown. I didn't know if she was still with Derek, and I found that I didn't care. She was a chapter I'd closed, a past I'd left behind. It still hurt sometimes, the memories of what we'd had and what we could have been, but I was learning to let go, to forgive myself for loving someone who wasn't worthy of that love. In the end, it wasn't about humiliating her or getting revenge. It was about reclaiming my own sense of self, my own worth. Leah had betrayed me, but she didn't define me. I was more than the man she'd lied to, more than the husband she'd cheated on. I was stronger than I'd ever known, and I was ready to move forward, one step at a time. It had been a year since that fateful day when I walked away from Leah, leaving behind the wreckage of a life I thought I'd cherish forever. A full year of painstakingly gathering the broken pieces of myself and rebuilding, one shard at a time. And here I was, standing on the precipice of something new. I could feel it, the crisp air of the morning, the warmth of the sun on my face, the weight of the past finally lifting. I moved into a new apartment 2 months ago, and it was my safe haven. There was no ghost of Leah here, no echoes of the life we'd shared. The walls were painted a warm gray, decorated with artwork I'd picked out myself, framed pictures of my friends and family, and a potted plant that I was learning to take care of. A symbol of growth that I'd never expected to find therapeutic. I had learned to enjoy the small moments of solitude, the quiet hours spent reading a book or cooking a meal for myself, music humming in the background. Life was moving on, and I was letting it. But today was different. Today was about new beginnings. Her name was Mia. We met in the most ordinary way, at the grocery store of all places. I'd been picking out some vegetables, half paying attention, when I noticed her struggling to reach something on the top shelf. Without thinking, I stepped in to help, handing her the box of cereal she'd been reaching for. She thanked me with a smile that was bright and genuine, and we started talking right there in the aisle. It was unexpected, like a door swinging open to a room I didn't realize I wanted to enter. We exchanged numbers, and after a few days of texts that made me smile more than I cared to admit, I asked her out to coffee. And here I was now, standing outside the little cafe, my heart pounding with nerves and anticipation. I'd worried in the weeks leading up to this that I wasn't ready, that my heart was still too bruised, too guarded to try again. But as I saw her through the window, sitting at a table, her eyes scanning the menu, I knew I had to try. She looked up and caught my gaze, her face breaking into a smile that was warm and inviting. I took a deep breath, my feet moving before my mind caught up. I walked through the door, the bell above it chiming softly, and she waved at me, her eyes sparkling in the morning light. "Hey," I said as I approached the table, my voice surprisingly steady. "Hey," she replied, her smile widening. "Glad you made it." I sat down across from her, and as we started talking, the nerves slowly melted away. She was kind, easy to talk to, and I found myself laughing more in that 1 hour than I had in months. It wasn't love at first sight. No, I'd learned better than to believe in fairy tales, but it was something real, something promising, and that was enough. After our coffee, we walked through the park nearby, the air crisp and cool, and I felt it, a sense of peace, of possibility. It wasn't about Leah anymore, or the betrayal, or the scars left behind. It was about me, about healing, about taking the risk to let someone in again. Mia turned to me, her eyes curious. "Tell me something about yourself," she said. "Something that makes you who you are." I paused, thinking about her question, and then smiled. "I guess I'm someone who's learning to start over," I said. "Someone who's realizing that life can be beautiful again, even after it falls apart." She nodded, her eyes softening. "That's a good answer," she said. And as we continued walking, the weight of the past finally started to loosen its grip, falling away like leaves in the wind. I wasn't fixed, not completely. There were still pieces of me that needed time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was ready to open my heart again, to see where this journey would take me. And that, I knew, was the beginning of something beautiful.